Crossroads, and if we've never met, my name's Adam, and I'm a pastor at Crossroads, and I get to kind of go around. We have 3 different campuses, if you didn't know. One church with 3 campuses, so sometimes I'm here, and sometimes I'm at one of the other ones. And I always love coming here. It's such a beautiful family at this campus. It's really wonderful, and I'm sure if you've been here more than once, you've felt that. And so before we even get into this morning's message and the series we're going to do, I just want to say a few things that I hope can be encouraging, is in particular how we kind of view what we're doing. That we don't believe that this is a sacred place. We believe you are a sacred person. Because we believe God makes everyone, male and female, into His image, and that inherently gives them a dignity and a sanctity and a sacredness that should never be violated. So you just need to know that the only thing sacred here is you. It's not this place. It's you, because you are made in the image of God, whether you believe in God or not. Another thing we believe is, we don't believe this building is really important. We believe the body is important, like God's body, made up of His kids, people that trust in Him. That is really what's important. That if this building went away, we'd all just keep doing what we're doing. We'd just be colder in the winter and hotter in the summer. That'd be it. And we'd be standing in a dirt field, much like many believers around the world do when they gather for church, because they can't afford a building or AC. We believe, because everybody is created with this like divine sanctity, we believe everybody is deserving of love, acceptance, and forgiveness. That we would extend to others the very things that God is always extending to us. And if you read through the stories and Jesus' teachings, and if you've never really taken the teachings of Jesus serious, you should read them for yourself. And he talks about this idea, and his disciples talk about this idea, is that whatever love God's given you, would you give to someone else? Whatever forgiveness He's given you, would you extend it to someone else? Whatever kind of level of mercy God has extended to you, would you extend it to someone else, including those people that we all have in our lives that don't deserve our grace or our mercy or our forgiveness, but followers of Jesus realize we didn't deserve anything either. And so we are just so grateful for His grace, we can't help but want to share that with others. So, welcome to your home for the morning, whether this is your first time or 100th time. Make yourself at home. Come as you are. And I can't make you do this, but if you let me ask this of you, if I could be so bold, come as you are, but be open to what God may want to change in you. Because it will only be a change for the better. I'm not saying it won't be uncomfortable. I'm not saying it won't at times be fearful. It might even be painful, but it may be what's best for you, much like a surgeon has to go sometimes and surgically cut open and remove things that are hurting you. And they do it for your good, and God does too, because He's a great physician. So let's pray, and then let's hop into what we're going to do this morning. Jesus, I thank You for Your great love, and Jesus, we're gathered here in Your name. Everything's about You. I wish we could just call this Jesus Church, and just I wish we knew what You look like, and we could put a photo of You and say, just talk to this guy, follow that guy, because Jesus, ever since I've given my life to You, You've changed it radically. You've made it better. You've filled me with hope. You've helped me with anxiety. You've helped me with my fears. And Jesus, I'm just so grateful for all that You've done. So bless my friends that are here today gathered, those that may not have an understanding of Your love yet and Your grace. May You woo them. May You show them that You care for them. In Jesus' name, amen. So let me ask you a question. And I think it's kind of a dumb question, because I think I know the answer. But who here loves waiting? It's like one of your favorite things. Like, you go out of your way to make sure it's 5 o'clock before you get on the road. You're like, whatever I can do to make this drive longer. Unless you're maybe having problems at home, maybe you do. But for the most part, I don't like waiting for water to boil. I don't like waiting for my computer to connect to the Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. I don't like waiting in traffic. I don't like waiting in a waiting room, even though I know that they called it that for a reason, and it's going to happen whether I like it or not. I don't like waiting on my wife to get ready. Is anybody married to a spouse where you're the one waiting? Raise your hand if you're the one. I know, they're probably with you now, they're mad, I understand. So I don't like waiting on my wife for things. She just takes a little bit longer than I would like. But I have found that there is one person in my life that I enjoy waiting on even less, and it is God. I don't like waiting on God. You ever had to wait on God for something? Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. Are you waiting on God for something? Mm-hmm. Waiting on Him to answer your prayers? Waiting on Him to give you some direction in life? Waiting on Him to bring healing for some physical, mental, or emotional thing that you're experiencing? Maybe you're waiting on Him to restore a relationship that's gone sideways with your son or your daughter, your mom, your dad, an aunt, a sibling. Maybe you're waiting on God to help you start a family. Maybe you're waiting on God to get you a job or get you a new job. And you're like, how long do I have to wait? Maybe you're waiting on God to show up in a way that He's never shown up before and make Himself real in a way that He's never made Himself real to you before. You've been waiting. Just show up. Just make yourself tangible to me. Maybe you're waiting on a son or daughter to come back into relationship with you, or for your son or daughter to come back into a relationship with God. Or if you're like my grandma, who's around 83 years old, you're waiting on God to just take you home because she's ready. She just wants to be with God, right? Have you ever experienced the pain and confusion and disappointment and sometimes disillusionment that can come from the feeling or feeling like God is running late? Sometimes when life is bitter, it feels like God is just taking His sweet time. You're like, come on, any moment now, this would be fantastic. Sometimes we feel like we've waited long enough and we've had enough. Have you ever felt like asking God a few questions about His timing and His plans and His purposes? Like if you could just tangibly, let's have a sit-down interview. And not only would you ask Him some questions, but maybe you would even have some ideas on how He could do His job better. Right? Have you ever had those? I know some of the stuff we just keep to ourselves and we don't say out loud, but we think it and we feel it. But if God were just to make it right here, you'd be like, all right, here's how you could do a better job by making my life better. Now, here's something that's, I think, is really important as it relates to asking God questions. I think it's important to hear and hear over and over again and be reminded of that. The questions you have are incredibly important. The questions you have, the questions you're wrestling with, are really important to us. And when I say us, I don't mean me, I mean us. Because we're family, whether we know each other that well or not. But your questions are important to us, but even maybe more significant than any of those is your questions are incredibly important to your Creator, to God. That God loves questions. God is not insecure about your questions. God is not insecure about your ideas, about how He can do things better. He's not like me and you who get insecure when people give us criticism, whether it's constructive or not. He's pretty self-assured. When you make all things and you hold all things together, you don't get ping-ponged by the whims and thoughts of others. So I just think it's so important, especially when you're going through a tough time, that questions are valuable. And I know here at Crossroads, what we're trying to build at all of our campuses, because, listen, and maybe you've experienced this in your own life, either through a religious system or through religious people, you were made to feel like questions were not to be asked. And if questions were to be asked, then that meant those people were asking now a question about you. You asked a question, and now the people you asked the question with were asking a question about you, which was something like, what's wrong with you? Why are you asking that? Where is your faith? right? So some of you may be here today, and you just need to hear, regardless of what else I say from this point forward, you just need to hear, God is okay with your questions. He can handle it. And I think the only reason why people will sometimes kind of just get weirded out by people's questions, regardless of what they are, is because they're insecure. They're insecure about their faith, and they're insecure about their God. And I don't serve a God who's insecure, so I don't need to be insecure for him. He can handle his own. I think some of you just need to be encouraged, a reminder that if you got questions, you got struggles, you got, hey, I wish this was different. Welcome to the party. Welcome to the family of God's believers. And I know not all of us like to say those things out loud because we think we're the only one asking them, but we're not. And so all of us here, I know, are trying to become more transparent, more real, so that it can help other people be more transparent, more real with whatever they're going through. So, if you missed last week, oh man, it was so deeply profound. So I want to touch on it before we get into this Sunday. But if you find yourself in a place right now where things are tough, you're going through something and you're thinking to yourself, I don't deserve this. I've done nothing to deserve this. Why me? What have I done? Or maybe you're going through something and you've maybe had people make you feel like it's because of you. And here's what you need to know. As long as there's been religion, there's been this idea that if you're going through something bad, it's because there's something bad or wrong about you. That has been around for thousands. In fact, that was the idea for thousands and thousands of years, and it still is the idea for many. That if you are in a good circumstance, it's because there's something good about you, something wonderful about you. And if you're in a bad circumstance, it's because there's something bad about you. You're doing something bad. You're thinking something bad. You're asking something bad. That is always the idea. And so last week was so important. If you missed it, that's why I want to just share the verse and the main thing from last week before we hop into this week. Is that the disciples of Jesus also thought like that if you're good, you get good things. If you're bad, you get bad things. It's clean, it's simple, everybody understands it, and it's fair. So, there was this man who was born blind. And they would see him because he was blind. And of course, if you're blind, especially in that culture, you're a beggar. You have no ability to get hired for work. You are 100% dependent on people walking by to give you something, food or money to get food or water, whatever it is. So, of course, Jesus and his disciples would have went past this man. He would have been known. He probably would have sat in the same place every day, over and over and over and over and over again. So the disciples looked at Jesus and they asked the question. This is such a great question. In John chapter 9, he says, the disciples asked him, Rabbi, which is the word for teacher, because Jesus was their teacher. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? What are they really saying? It's got to be somebody's fault. It's somebody's fault that he's blind. Either his fault, and then, man, they bumped it up a whole other level. You can experience bad things, not even because you were bad, but because mom and dad were bad. Right? So I wonder if this blind guy was blaming his parents, because that's what the disciples were kind of suggesting, that maybe it was all of their fault. But they knew it had to be one or the other. It was not a coincidence. It was not just happenstance. This happened because either he was bad or his family was bad. Who was to blame? There had to be somebody to blame. Here's how Jesus answers their question. It is so profound. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. You think it's one of their fault? It's none of their fault. To which they just went, what? That can't be. That's not how it works. If you're good, good things happen. If you're bad, bad things happen. That's how it works with God. God only gives good to good and only gives bad to bad because he's God. And Jesus, the Son of God, is going, nope, it's neither of their fault. And he didn't pick someone else, like an aunt or a distant cousin that was there to blame. No. He said, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So then he answers it with like this mysterious answer, right? Like, this happened because I'm going to do something crazy. And he heals them and displays his glory and his power. So what we said last week is that what you're going through may have nothing to do with you. What you're going through may have nothing to do with you. This could be deeply profound and deeply free. Yes, are there consequences to our decisions? Yes. If you drink hard alcohol every hour of every day, will you suffer for it? Yes. And would you be responsible for that? Yes. There are natural consequences to decisions we make, right? Well, what Jesus is saying, not everything that you're going through is because of you. There may be some things that just,
you don't even know about what's going on. Because many people who grew up in religion live with guilt, shame, and condemnation because everything they're going through is their fault because of something they've done. And here Jesus is just flipping that on its head and going, there's things going on you guys even know about that have nothing to do with you. Should we ask God, Lord, is there something I've done? That's a great question to ask. But should we live in the guilt and condemnation, which is assuming everything we're going through must be because of our fault? Or someone we know and love and what they're going through, and it just must be their fault, and then we get all judgmental and self-righteous. Gets dirty, gets ugly. So man, I think some of you need to hear that and be reminded of that. So I wanted to spend time in saying that again. So this whole series, the series is called When God Doesn't Make Sense. And if you've walked with God for over a month, you've already discovered there are times he just doesn't make any sense at all to you. He just doesn't make sense. So we kind of created this tagline for this series, that this series is about trusting in God's character in life's confusion. Because it can be confusing at times when you walk with God, and then what do you do when things don't seem to align and things don't seem to connect? These aren't going together. This doesn't make sense. God, you don't make sense. Why I'm going through what I'm going through doesn't make any sense at all because I love you. Why? It just, you can't connect the dots. The picture's not clear. And so what can we do to trust in God's character even in the midst of life's confusion? So I'm going to ask you again, what are you waiting on God for? Some of you maybe waited on God for so long for something you just moved on. You try not even to think about it because it just never happened for you, whatever it was. And now, just even thinking about it, bringing it up would be a sore spot of just the disappointment you experienced with God because he didn't show up with whatever it was you're going through. So let me ask you this, what is your it? What is that, the it for you, that God didn't show up and change it? That God didn't show up and just remove it? That God just hasn't shown up and just made it better yet? What is that it for you that you're asking questions like, God, why haven't you done something about it yet? Why haven't you healed it yet? Why haven't you changed it yet? Because I think part of the confusion for me, and maybe part of the confusion for you, is that if you love God and you believe in God, you also believe he's a God who has the power to do something about it. And isn't that where the confusion can settle in? I know you can do something about it. And it gets confusing when he hasn't yet. So there you are, and there I am, waiting and wondering and asking, where are you? Why haven't you showed up yet? Why aren't you seemingly here? Because, God, I love you, and I know you love me. So, I want to tell you the true story about two sisters and a brother. Three people who loved Jesus, and Jesus deeply loved them. These were three of Jesus' closest friends and protectors and disciples. Jesus, on many occasions, would stay at their home, eat meals in their home, and share love and friendship with them. And as we'll see in this true story, even Jesus' closest friends struggled with his timing. That even Jesus' closest friends were confused by his plans. And even Jesus' closest friends asked him some very tough questions. So if you're going through a tough time right now, you have some friends in Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. And I want to tell you their story in case you've never heard it. It's in a book called John. John was a disciple of Jesus, and John began to write down the stories and teachings of Jesus. And here's what he captures in these stories. John chapter 11, it says, a man named Lazarus was sick, because the people first reading this at the time didn't all necessarily know who Lazarus was. Some of them would have known him. He was from the city of Bethany, the village where Mary and his sister Martha lived. So the whole family lived together in the same city. And the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Jesus isn't with them. Lord, they told him, the one you love is sick. So Mary and Martha did what we do when we're sick. They sent a message to Jesus. Now back then, they sent an actual messenger to go find Jesus and tell him that the one they loved was sick. Now, when we want to send a message to Jesus, we just pray, right? We go, hey, Jesus, I'm sick, or hey, Jesus, this is what I need. So this is what they did. So Mary and Martha, in their time of need, seek out Jesus. And it makes a lot of sense because they had seen Jesus do some amazing things, and they believed that Jesus had the ability and the power to heal their brother. In fact, they had seen Jesus do this many times to complete strangers, let alone someone that he loved. And did you capture that? That they didn't even name their brother. The messengers just sent the message, the one that you love is sick, knowing that Jesus would know exactly who they were talking about, much like if you have a best friend and someone came to you and said, your best friend is sick, you wouldn't go, I have no idea what you're talking about. Jesus knew that they were talking about Lazarus. That's how close Jesus and Lazarus was, and this whole family was, that he knew without even his name being mentioned. And we know that this sickness was bad and grave, whatever it was, because early in the story that we haven't read, the religious leaders in this town put a price on Jesus' head, that if he were to return to this city, they would arrest him and potentially kill him. There was a plan in place. So you know Mary and Martha had to weigh that out when they sent the messenger, knowing that if the one we love, Jesus, comes back to this city, this was what may happen to him. But they loved their brother so much they did what any of us would do, which is, hey, Jesus, I'll let you figure out that piece. Please get here. I know they have a price on your head, but please come here and do something to help my brother. So we know this wasn't, he just had a flu. This was big. This was something that could lead to his death. So they asked Jesus to do something that could lead to Jesus' death. So the messengers arrived. Jesus was about 20 miles away, which is about a day's journey to get to them. So the messengers go and they find Jesus, and here's where it goes. When Jesus heard that the one he loved was sick, he said, the sickness will not end in death. So you kind of get a glimpse that Jesus knows something about the story that no one else is privy to. Which, if you walk with Jesus, you just got to know that happens all the time. That there are pieces of the story that I don't know that he holds behind his back, but it's just parts of the story that he only sees. And we're trying to connect things and we can't. And Jesus knows how it all connects. So he drops a hint about this in response to this. He says, will not end in death. He said, no, it is for God's glory. God's Son will receive glory because of it. So he's just kind of just throwing out there, hey, look, something wonderful is going to happen here that brings God a lot of glory. People at the end of the story are going to go, God is good, not God is bad. Because when times are tough, my natural sometimes is like, God, are you bad? God, it feels bad. Are you bad? You know, all that kind of stuff. And he says, no, this is going to end good. And then I love this. Oh, man, it's so good. So verse 5, Jesus loved Martha. So John, who's writing this down, knows how deeply he loved this family. So he writes down these words in case the listeners didn't know just how much he loved them. So Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now, here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. A surprising turn. And if you're Mary and Martha, an incredibly disappointing, painful turn. Because the verse we just read in verse 5 says, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And then the very next verse says this. So after he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. You know that none of his disciples at that moment could comprehend that response. And you know, all the people in Bethany and those close to Mary and Martha could not comprehend that. Of course, they didn't hear that response. It would take another day before the messengers got back. And Jesus wasn't with them. Think about that. The ones that he loved, Jesus stays 2 more days. haven't you ever maybe felt that way about God? Like, it feels like you're not coming. It feels like you're not going to show up. It feels like you're late. It feels like if you really loved me, you would have come right when the messengers sent for you. These are all valid questions. And you've got to know that Jesus knew everyone was thinking that and feeling that. Because Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus. He stayed for 2 more days. He did not immediately go. And these were people he deeply loved. And maybe this is where you're at right now. Where it just feels like he's not moving. And certainly not moving quick enough as you would like. Back in Bethany, you can imagine the emotions are high as they're watching Lazarus get sicker and sicker and sicker. And then you know they'd have someone outside of Bethany looking for the messengers and seeing him in a distance and kind of going, okay, there's the messengers. Okay, there's like 13, Jesus plus disciples, where I see messengers, I don't see all the talk, right? You can see the progression that Mary and Martha, though it doesn't tell us this, what Mary and Martha must have been feeling, where they went from, we know he's coming. We believe he's coming because we know how much he loves us and we know how much he loves Lazarus. And then as the day turned to day 2 and day 3, maybe that began to turn to, where is he? When is he coming? He's going to be too late. And then most certainly, once they saw the messengers return without Jesus or the disciples, that would have just sealed them, seemingly. That he wasn't coming. You did find Jesus, right? Messengers? Yeah. And you told them, there's Lazarus, right? Yep. And he stayed. Yep, he stayed. So now Jesus begins to drop some hints. And he says to the disciples, let's go back to Judea, which is where Bethany is located. And he starts to drop some hints that maybe he knows something and is up to something that they don't know about. And here we go, John 11, verse 11. He says, after he said this, Jesus went on speaking to them, talking about his disciples. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, he said, but I'm going to go wake him up. And this is so funny. I love these exchanges between him and his disciples, because if you're a disciple of Jesus, you've had these same conversations with Jesus where you think you're talking about one thing, but you're not, and you don't understand. And so they think he's literally just sleeping like one does to get better when you're sick. At that time, sleep was a euphemism for death. It was a common expression for death was, hey, so-and-so went to sleep. Well, they think he's actually talking about Lazarus sleeping, to which they all would have been, great, he'll get better. His disciples replied, Lord, if he's sleeping, he will get better. And it says Jesus had been speaking about the death of Lazarus, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. It says, so then Jesus just told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Wait a minute. When the messengers first got here, you just said this thing won't end in death. And now you're saying it does end in death. Again, no ability to understand what Jesus is up to or what is going on. And then he gives a little bit of a glimpse of like what he may be up to. He says, for your benefit, I'm glad I wasn't there. You're like, oh, no, I'd rather you not do anything for my benefit if it means Lazarus is dead. But he's like, no, for your benefit, I'm glad I wasn't there. Now you will believe. And they must be going, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. Believe what? And he says, but now let us go to him. To which they're all thinking, it's going to be too late. John 11, the story continues. It says, when Jesus arrived, he's now at Bethany, in the city of Bethany. He found out that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. They already buried him. They already had the services. Now, back in that day, in the first century, and before that, 4 days was significant because it was believed at that time that for 3 days, for the first 3 days of your death, your spirit would kind of hover around your body. Just in case something happened and you were to be resurrected, that spirit would come back into your body and you could resurrect again. So it was a commonly held belief that 3 days was a significant day, which means they're on day 4, which means it is come and gone. All hope is lost. There is no coming back. The spirit of Lazarus is gone. It says Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to Mary and Martha. They had come to comfort them because their brother was dead. So in the nearby town of Jerusalem, many people who had heard about the death went. Think about that. Many people had heard about it, not named Jesus, went when they first heard about it where Jesus stayed. Jesus wasn't even there in the morning, let alone he wasn't there for the morning. He wasn't, everyone else was mourning with them, but not Jesus. So you can imagine how confusing this would have been for all of them. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, I love that she went up to meet him. How many of you, that's you? That's what you would have done. Like, oh, he's coming? Okay, I'm going to go meet him where he's at. Like, you're not waiting for him to come to you. You see him coming, you're like, oh, I'll go meet him on the road. Right? She's not waiting. She's waited long enough. Right? She's waited long enough, and she hears he's coming, and she's going to go meet him where he's at. Right? I love that. It says, but Mary stayed at home. They were really opposite sisters. Anyways, he gets to Jesus. Martha says, Lord, I wish you'd been here. Then my brother would not have died. She just gets right to the point. I love this about Martha. I love this. She is so real with Jesus, who she loves, who she knows is the Son of God, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. And she goes to him, and she doesn't sugarcoat it. She isn't all holier than thou, prim and proper, and I'll be careful with my words. She just straight up hands it to him. I wish you had been here. My brother would not be dead. What is she saying? Who is she blaming? Jesus. Jesus, I know if you would have been here, this wouldn't have gone down like that. I love that. I love that. Some of you here, you need some Martha in you, where you can just be real with Jesus. Forget the whole religious, prim, proper, keep it all together, gotta be whatever. Come on. Martha just goes to him and just lets him have it. This is how she felt. She didn't have to help how she felt. But then there's this other surprising part about Martha too. And the very next thing that comes out of her mouth. But I know that even now God will give you anything you ask for. I love this. Martha blames, but she also believes. She's not just a skeptic and a cynic and a critic. She has faith in Jesus. She trusts in his character, even in her life's confusion, that he's good. Because if you just take the story as is, I mean, he doesn't look very good in this story. But see, Martha knew Jesus. She didn't have a superficial relationship with Jesus. She didn't have a mediator relation with Jesus. Most religions, you have a mediator. You have to go to the priest. You have to go to the prophet. You have to go to this person. And then that person will connect you with God. No. Martha had a personal relationship with the Son of God. So she was a little biased, as all of us are when you have a personal relationship with someone. You're biased towards them. You know, like, okay, she knew Jesus wasn't evil.